Welcome to Creating Meaningful STEM Learning Experiences Through Service Learning. My name is Elizabeth Koenig, and I work on our STEM initiatives here at NYLC. After watching this video today, you should know service learning best practices. I think it's important that we're all on the same page about what makes service learning great before we move towards STEM and service learning. Next, we'll talk about service learning in STEM and how service learning can be used to create STEM learning experiences that are meaning and relevant to students. And then I'll also leave you with tools and resources today that will support your use of service learning. I just want to give you a little background about the National Youth Leadership Council, the organization that I work for, so that you understand kind of where we're coming from in our approach to service learning. So NYLC is dedicated to developing young leaders who can address the needs of their community. Over 30 years ago, we started the National Youth Leadership Training, a camp that was in response to racial tensions that were happening in the community at the time. Through this experience, youth were energized to make change in their community, but we found that we were sending them back to their communities, to adults who didn't know what to do with them. So we found that supporting educators in this work is an integral piece of the equation. And so that we do that today through professional development, including the webinar you're watching now, and then also the Generator School Network, the online community that you can become a part of. And then we also consider ourselves a leader in the service learning field, and we think it's important to advocate for service learning as a pedagogy. So we do advocacy on the state and national level, as well as convening the National Service Learning Conference. So I'd like to start out today by just talking about the definition of service learning. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about the definition. Many people use different definitions, but I just want to share the one that NYLC uses, and then we'll briefly touch on some key words that are important to this definition. So, service learning is an approach to teaching and learning in which students use academic knowledge and skills to address genuine community needs. So the first part of this that I want to point out is that service learning is an approach to teaching and learning. It's not just a one-sided effort, but one that both students and teachers participate in. Second is pointing out the academic knowledge and skills, and that's where service learning is really grounded. We recommend putting academic knowledge and skills at the forefront of a service learning experience to make sure that you are meeting the needs of students. We often see projects that are defined by the end product or project and the learning goals, and we really want to make sure that they're also defined by the academic knowledge, and we'll kind of talk about how you do that a little bit later in this video. And then lastly, something to point out is the genuine community need. Those are vital to a meaningful learning experience. Genuine community needs actively engage participants in meaningful and personally relevant service activities. They encourage participants to understand their service experience in the context of underlying societal issues. And then also it really leads to attainable and visible outcomes since they are those needs in the community. So as you probably noticed, there's a strong emphasis on quality. And what does service learning quality mean? Well, we define service learning quality by the K-12 service learning standards for quality practice. So these standards were developed by using the strongest evidence-based elements for effective practice. And then we've really seen in our research that quality really does matter in the effectiveness of service learning. So we really want to make sure that these standards are taken into account while developing your service learning curriculums. And we'll talk about them a little bit later, but I just want to make sure you keep these in mind when we're talking about our example in a little bit. So we're going to start by giving you an example of Evergreen Academy Middle School. This is a school that I worked with as part of the Generator Go Green initiative. It was a Learn and Serve America funded program that focused on engaging young people in STEM-based service learning that focused on issues of environmental sustainability. So Evergreen Academy Middle School, just to give you a little background on them, is on the south side of Chicago and serves 6th through 8th grades. The student population is about 85% Hispanic, and 89% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. Evergreen is not a STEM school specifically, but there is a school-wide investment in college and career readiness, and they offer advanced courses in math and science, including robotics. So a little background on the project that they were working on that we're going to talk about today. So their project was to look at the school's energy use, waste management, and transportation, and how that relates to the larger themes of climate change and human impact on the environment. The project was started as an after-school club, and the teacher that they worked with, his name was Ron Hall, saw the value of bringing these lessons to the whole school and integrating them throughout the whole curriculum. So that's what we'll talk about today. So today we're going to use the Service Learning Action Plan. This is a really great way to brainstorm what the service learning will look like in your classroom. People plan in many different ways, but we think this is a really great place to start. So you can get this form on the Generator School Network as well. So let's start out by talking about what academic goals and objectives will be met in the unit. So the big questions that Ron asked his students to look at were, what is energy, what is climate change, what is humans' impact on the environment, and similar questions to that. So then he also mapped them to go specifically to content standards. So an example of some of those content standards include in the sciences, they looked at different energy sources in use and reported which one was the greenest and why. They looked at how waste was handled in the building and the community and reported these findings. They learned how to calculate watts and therms, and then they calculated energy use in every classroom. They also used tools including video cameras and infrared thermometers to collect data, and then they published this data online. In their math classes, they tabulated the results that they found. They tabulated results and calculated how much energy was used and saved around the building. And then they also had a strong tie to the language arts by researching topics and communicating them to the rest of their class. They wrote persuasive essays about what is the best way to create a green school. They read about the history of energy usage and compared it to current energies today. And then they also wrote persuasive letters to local officials to increase recycling containers in the neighborhood. So that's kind of just an example of what those learning and academic outcomes can be. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the civic and character education goals. So these can be taken from many different places. Many schools and school districts have different ones that they're asking you to meet. These are taken from the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. And examples of what these character and civic education goals could be are social awareness. So the students focused on understanding others' points of view and perspective. They practice responsible decision making by analyzing situations perceptively and identifying the problems clearly. And also relationship management was a huge one, especially working with outside partners and with other people in the school. They were able to communicate clearly, work cooperatively, and exercising assertiveness, leadership, and persuasion. And so finally, in the Learn section, we're going to talk about how students will be assessed in meeting goals and outcomes. So I think it's really important to set these at the beginning of the process, so that you're setting them at the beginning to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what those goals and outcomes are. Many people build them into the reflection process, which happens throughout the service learning process. So this school did pre and post surveys. They did rubrics and reflection methods. One thing that I do think is really interesting is that Ron Hall worked with the students to develop these assessments. And so this is definitely a place where youth voice comes into play. And you can also find the formative assessment teacher tool and an example of how this worked in his school on the Generator School Network. So before we move on, I just want to point out one important thing about this step that I want you to remember is that it is really important to set those academic and character goals before we move on to action. I think it's important to make sure that those are clear and that everyone's on the same page so that the learning experience is really driven by the academics. So now moving on to planning, looking at what genuine community need will the students address. So we already talked about this a little bit before, but it is really important to focus on a genuine community need. So this is service that actively engages participants in meaningful and personally relevant service activities. It encourages participants to understand their service experiences in the context of what's going on in their community, and then it also leads to attainable and visible outcomes and that are valued by those being served. So what community need did the students address in this project? So they laid it out as the majority of the students in this school do live in poverty, and their families definitely struggle to pay the bills and to make ends meet. So this education program the students demonstrated how these families can save money on their monthly energy bills, as well as giving them strategies for keeping their energy bills down. So this was helping them save money and save energy, and then also they practice this in their school as well. So the efforts of the club and the classes helped families keep more money in their pockets, which is really important to that community. So they addressed this in a couple of different ways. They did do the energy audits of schools, homes, and businesses. They also started to look a lot at community gardens and urban agriculture and the benefit of green spaces in urban communities and what that can do to the environment. And then with both of these issues, they did community education. So they had community nights and they talked to the community about these issues and what they could do about them. So the last part of this step is how the class investigated and how they ensured that this was a genuine community need. So they did this in a couple different ways. They conducted research in primary sources. One way they did that was they investigated how energy was used when the school was originally built and how it's changed since then. They conducted home energy audits of their own homes and saw where energy was being wasted and how it affected their energy bill. They brought in a local artist who does sculptures with items found in the trash and recycling and reflected on what his art was saying about environmental stewardship. And they also met with local policymakers and business owners about what issues they thought were important to get a really good read on the community. So the next step in this process is looking at who the community partners will be for the project. We've already talked about a couple of them, including the local politicians and local businesses and artists. But one I really think is a good value, especially in this project, was working with the school facilities staff. So the custodians and the building engineers, they're definitely an awesome resource in projects like this. They often have lots of ideas on how to cut down on waste and how to save money, and they just need to be asked by someone. So it's a really great opportunity for the students to work with this partner. Youth voice can be incorporated in many different ways, and how it was incorporated in this unit was through the assessment process. Like we talked about earlier, the teacher worked with the students to develop those formative assessments. The students definitely drove the community need focus. It was framed by the teacher about looking at the human's impact on the environment, but the students really saw that this was where they wanted to focus, around energy and around the environment. And then also they led all of the community events to teach people about what they were learning and how they could implement what they were learning in their own homes and businesses. So then finally, reflection is an important part of this process. So one thing that it's important to note is that reflection needs to happen throughout the service learning process, not just at the end. And we often use the model of what, so what, and now what. So what's happening? What are we going to do about it? And once we've done something about it, now what are we going to do next? And what did that mean? So that's a really great way to kind of start framing the reflection activities. We also think it's important to use multiple intelligences to reach different students where they are. So an example from this unit is they did artwork, they had journals, they did letters and essays, and one really cool thing that they did was a video documentary. So the current students made it for the next group of students who would be working and building on this project. They talk about what they did, they talked about their successes and failures, and they talked about what they hoped for the future. So this is a really cool opportunity for reflection for the students. So that was the end of that example, and I just kind of want to tie it back to what we were talking about at the beginning around the K-12 service learning standards for quality practice, and have you think back on those and how those played out in the project. Hopefully you can see where those came up, but I just want to give you kind of some examples of how the service learning standards came through in that project from Evergreen Middle School. So in meaningful service, the students definitely investigated a community need, and they chose to address a topic where they felt that they would make a difference. With the diversity standards, the students worked throughout the community and had to take into account many different perspectives in the development of the project. And then for progress monitoring, the students helped develop the assessment that would monitor their progress as well as help them plan for the future. So this project definitely touched on all of the standards very well, but I just wanted to give you a few examples of what that looked like. So I just want to take a minute to pause, and I want to share a quote with you from Ron Hall about the work that he is doing. I think by sharing this project with you, this is a really great, huge project, but it's definitely been a development, and I wanted to kind of address that. So in a conversation with Ron, he said, "I realize that this way of approaching the curriculum gives students a real-world connection to concepts and deepens their understanding of themselves, their community, and their ability to actively fix problems that they see." So Ron was really inspired by how the service learning could be a really meaningful learning experience to his students. So now that we kind of walked through that project, I want to specifically talk about STEM and service learning. I think hopefully you'll be able to see where those really strong connections are between STEM and service learning, but I really wanted to call a couple of them out. So service learning is an inquiry-oriented project-based approach to STEM education. And I think this is really important a lot of times in STEM, and they talk about that inquiry-oriented and how that's so powerful, and about project-based learning and how that's so powerful. So I think service learning is a really great way to connect those. The project-based approach, which service learning uses, also is really helpful with STEM subjects. It develops a desire for learning and a tendency to embrace challenges. It helps students persist in the face of setbacks, to see effort as a path to mastery, and to find lessons and inspirations in the success of others. And those are all things that are talked about when talking about STEM and STEM education and how to make students successful in STEM. And then I think really one of the most important things is that connection to the real world. Students are able to see what STEM does, and it doesn't necessarily mean working in a lab or working on a computer. Students are able to see the socially beneficial aspects of service learning and the human connection. And we've seen that this is really important, especially when looking at girls in STEM subjects. They really see that real world connection and that human face, and that definitely draws them more into STEM and has them being more successful. And then what we've learned at NYLC in our work around STEM and service learning. So we've touched on a couple of them today. We found in our work with the Generator Go Green initiative and other programs that the quality of service learning is really important. And that's why we focus on those K-12 service learning standards and making sure that all of our work ties to those. In our work with the Generator Go Green initiative and STEM and service learning, we found that teachers who did service learning felt more prepared in inquiry-oriented teaching methods, which, as we've said before, is incredibly important to STEM. So teachers felt more prepared to encourage deep exploration, help students collect data, and use community resources to teach. So that's definitely something that's very promising around STEM and service learning. And then finally, the connection with the content standards. This is something that teachers often struggle with, especially with service learning, but we have found that by putting those academic and content standards at the front end before choosing the community need definitely helps teachers make sure that they make those connections. So that's what we have for today. I just want to make sure that I leave you with resources and where you can find more information on the Generator School Network on our website, nylc.org, and then also more information about the K-12 service learning standards are on the LIFT, and that's lift.nylc.org. And then I just want to remind you about some of the information that we talked about today, which you can find on the STEM and service learning topic on the Generator School Network. So information about the K-12 service learning standards, the example of the service learning action plan. There's also a profile of Ron Hall, the teacher at Evergreen Middle School. And there's also that formative assessment teacher tool about how he used formative assessment in his classroom. So, and if you have any more questions, feel free to contact me at NYLC, and there's my phone number and my email address as well. Thank you.